Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ron Fiamma. I'm with AIG, Private Client Group, along with Bridgepoint Risk Management. We're proud to be in our fourth year of sponsorship for the Pebble Beach Classic Car Forum. It's been a great opportunity for us. I'm in the insurance business. I insure clients' collections. So I insure their art, their wine, their jewelry, and of course their collector automobiles, which is the best part about my job. And so it makes sense for us to be out here. The best part of these forums for us over the past 4 years has been really sort of the educational component, right? We're all very concerned about spreading the news and the information about the collector car hobby, the future of transportation, and what's going to happen to these cars in the future, and who's going to pick up the mantle for the collector car hobby. So we're thrilled to continue our sponsorship for this series. This has been 12 sessions we've had over the past 3 days. This is the final session of the 12, and we're glad you're here to listen. We have a very interesting panel for you all today. So we're going to be discussing the future of urban mobility, electric cars, alternative transportation, everything that you guys are going to see changing over the next several years. So with that, I'm going to introduce the moderator, and he will take it away and introduce the rest of the panelists. So Tom Stone, welcome, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Is this working okay? Good. Again, my name is Tom Stone. I'm a strategic advisor to BYD on their SkyRail and Sky Shuttle programs, which you'll hear a little bit about here today. We're going to really shift gears. I guess I can use that term with this group. We're going to shift gears quite a bit, and we're going to try to talk about the future of urban mobility, not just cars, but other modes of transportation and where we think it's headed. Now, that said, even though my 45-year career has been almost entirely involved in planning and designing, constructing rapid transit systems in different cities around the world, I can assure you I'm a certifiable car nut. I grew up in Southern California. Cars have been in my blood, the blood of my family and my brother and I for a very long time. So, you know, that makes it a special honor and privilege to be here. We're all very pleased to have this opportunity to talk with you. Our focus is on the future of sustainable urban transportation. In this regard, we want to talk about a little bit about what's happening with the technology. And we're going to talk first about electric propulsion. And this slide, which was prepared by Bloomberg, is showing energy density of battery technology as it has evolved just over the last 10 years. And it's measuring it in terms of watt hours per kilogram, so the power output per unit weight for batteries. And you can see that battery technology is really improving rapidly. And the dots on this represent different battery chemistries. And extrapolating this line, you can see that batteries are becoming much more efficient and doing so very rapidly. What does that mean? It translates into one thing, longer range. Just using BYD's cars as an example from about 8 years ago up to today, you can see that range is going from, in that time period, about 300 kilometers to 520 kilometers, and it's an increasing trend. And what that means to me is that if this trend continues, the future of battery electric-based urban mobility could be very bright. So there may be a very significant opportunity for growth because market penetration in many countries for electric vehicles has been very small. Again, two charts here showing what Bloomberg has projected, the left hand showing what is the current percentage of electric vehicles in the world in gray. But what they're projecting is, as compared to internal combustion engines, shows a tremendous amount of growth. The right-hand slide breaks that down into different geographic regions. And of course, a lot of it is already in China and continued to grow in China. But you can see the next band up in white is the United States, then blue, Europe, and so forth. A lot of growth projected all around the world. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Wolfgang. Let me just give you a bit of an introduction because he has had a tremendous background in the industry. He's the design director for BYD. He's going to try to discuss in a very interesting way, I think, some important design issues that are going to affect greatly how electric vehicles of all types, not just cars, are going to be accepted and thrive in the world. He was born in Oberstdorf, Germany, graduated as an industrial designer from the International College of Arts and Sciences in Milan. He began his professional career in the design department at Alfa Romeo. In 1993, he was appointed chief designer of Alfa Romeo. There were many great Alfa cars that were developed under his design. I had intended to show you a number of those photos, but you can find it on the internet. In 2007, he became the head of Audi Group Design. And then later in that time period, he became the head of design for the Volkswagen Group. In 2017, he joined BYD and became design director based in Shenzhen, China. Please welcome Wolfgang Egger.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. As you say, in this future there will be a lot of opportunities for design.
Speak up.
Yeah,
it's very
to
noisy.
raise my voice is too noisy.
Yeah.
Yes. And let me start this discussion with a question. What is design? And the first thing, design are people. And at this point, let me introduce to you my brand new design team, a strong design team for BIT, which is one said Juanma Lopez, a special great designer for exterior design, and Michele Jauch-Paganetti is present here also, stand up here, for interior design. And it is all the young designers, young people, which are together in this 180-head international design team. International because we have our brand new design studio at its highest modern level design studio building in Shenzhen, in the south of China. We have an advanced design studio in Shanghai. And we have here in LA, we have the advanced design studio in LA, in the center, downtown of LA. Here you can see it. And let's go at this point with these people to the next question. What is design? Again, it is creativity. With creativity, we can create a lot of things. We start with a creative process with infinity open-minded, fresh proposals. A lot of ideas. These are fresh ideas. And from these fresh ideas, there's a process which creates like a tunnel from many ideas, getting more and more and towards the final product and for the decision. And this process has also, beyond there is a digital process, and there's a working skill of all these designers, which they are highly skilled for realizing their ideas and bringing them into some reality in the 3D, from the paper to the end of the final product, which is a car you can use on the street. So, again, the question, what is design? Design is very important, is culture. All these people in this process, they need some culture in their mind. And we are working on the culture, Chinese culture, from the traditional element, what you can use to bring into our design some elements for creating a specific and unique BID design element. And we call this the dragon face. It's our dragon design. And you see here on the screen some examples how it is evolving in the last, from this year, last year to the next year. You see 2 years now. Starting from the dragonflies, you see outside in the green. You can see, maybe today you already had the opportunity to see this car. And to the next future, this will be next year, the new Dragon EV face with its strong identity for EV car. And culture also means many more elements. Elements which come from the idea like we have this Dragon Scratch. The Dragon Scratch are these sharp elements which you can see on these very soft and sensual surfaces, very harmonious sculptural design, but with some very sharp elements. And we call this the dragon's crash. We have also the dragon spine. You see this on a monitor. It's a design which remembers your dragon spine, but it's a beautiful design. It's a very modern, beautiful design. And also the dragon scales, for example, some patterns which can characterize some surfaces or some materials. And all this together, they make a unique design language, which is only BID specific identity. After people, creativity, culture, for this design is experience. And experience, let me show this experience also. You can see with the light, a combination with the technology, lighting technology. Here maybe I go back once. The lighting technology, you can see this movement of the light, and this is creating an emotion. Emotion for the owner and emotion also for all the people who can see a BID EV in the future. It's creating really an experience and a unique experience for the brand, for the beer. Our EV, the dragon face experience, let's call it like that. But also in interiors, ladies and gentlemen, this EV future will offer great opportunities just to create these lighting effects, which are creating very comfortable and very emotional the effects that make you feel very well. They make you feel very well and very comfortable inside the car. And in the future, with the autonomous driving future, you can see that this sports car can retract the steering wheel and the monitors can move, and they get one monitor, 3 monitors getting one monitor. So from a driving experience sports car, this car can change completely into autonomous driving, a comfortable car which you can use every day, also for going to work, to the office. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, here we have seen what is design. The question was the people, the creativity, culture, experience. But what else is BID design? BIDC is not only the private transportation, the car, it's also the public and the future mobility. Future mobility is in BID very unique because the brand offers a system. We are working for a complete system. It cannot be only in the future a car, a truck, a bus, or a train. It has to be something which integrates all these means in one transport, in a system, in the city. And here's the best. Sorry for that. And it's, we have here a black page. Okay, you see, it's just this integration of these different means in one system with nodes which are connecting all these transportation means. But also the integration into the cities will be one point for design. It's a challenge for design to make them beautiful and to make them really integrated into the city. And you see here is our Sky Shuttle, the monorail, the future monorail, that can change completely the experience of public transportation. This is driving directly into the building, is stopping into the building. Or here, or it's just part of the balcony of the terrace of the building. It is part of the architecture in the city. And you can drive into the shopping mall directly, and you have also, during the transport, you have this experience of shopping already when you are going through a city here. And what more is the experience? Just would like to show you also what we are working for the future buses, EV buses in the city. This experience which makes you a lighting experience where you can send bus stops, just these lighting effects. They just tell you, please get in and make you comfortable and make you feel really special. You are enjoying to go into a public transport. And this together also here some examples. We have here just a welcome light on the bottom, also for not only for the private transportation, but also for these Sky Shuttle, Sky Rail, and for the buses. And in the end also for the design, the challenge is also the quality. We want to bring quality into the public transportation that looks very nice. You can see, you can feel the technology. You can see also what is behind all this beauty and all this transportation. So here I finished my presentation. with his pictures also on the system, and then you can see all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. We're going to turn to J.F. Finn. He is a principal with Gensler, the world's largest design firm, and he's going to address some of the ongoing architectural and urban design considerations for these technologies that we're discussing. These two projects here are projects that he's directed in recent years. The one on the left is the City Center project in Las Vegas, which is built and fully operational, and on the right is the Las Vegas monorail project, where he was project director, and I worked on it with him as well. JF is currently the firm-wide leader for Gensler's mixed-use practice area and studio director in their Boston office. He is also a Southern California native. He received his degree in architecture just down the road, I guess we can say that, from San Luis Obispo, that's Cal Poly. I think some of you know about what a great school that is. For the past 3 years, JF has been leading one of Gensler's internal research teams focused on the impact of autonomous vehicles on the future of cities. And he's going to talk about that. It's mind-boggling, actually, when you think about this. I'm going to pass this over to JF.
So thank you very much, Tom. Can you all hear me? So thanks very much, Tom. I appreciate it. We just heard Wolfgang tell you that the future of automobiles is going to be beautiful and very highly experiential. I get the enviable task of telling you that it's probably also going to be autonomous and driverless. But bear with me, there's going to be a happy ending here for everybody who loves driving cars and the pleasure of driving cars. So as Tom mentioned, we've been doing a research project at Gensler. A lot of our clients, we are one of the largest design firms, and a lot of our clients are just down the road in Silicon Valley. And they have been putting a lot of investment into driverless technology and autonomous technology. So we kind of said, okay, if that is the case, what is going to be the impact on the physical environment, which is kind of our realm, and what do we need to do about it to prepare for that future? So we asked a few questions. Is it real? If it is, when might it happen? And if so, what are some of the impacts? And to do this, we kind of went backwards a little bit. New York, 1890, about 150,000 horses existed in the streets of New York. And fun facts when you're doing research projects, turns out horses drop about 22 pounds of manure every single day, so 150,000 horses, 22 pounds manure. It's a really big problem in a city like New York. So to solve this problem, they had a big convening, got all the brightest minds on the East Coast to come out, and they're going to have a week-long convening to say, how are we going to solve the problem of this massive pile of horse manure? After 3 days, it broke up. Convening broke up, people ran out there and said, I am not giving up my horse or my horse lifestyle. No way, no how. Okay, 10 years later, Henry Ford introduces the assembly line and creates affordable horseless carriages for the masses. A few years after that, horses are outnumbered by automobiles. A few years after that, there are no more horses on the streets of New York. So where are we today? Where are we today is right now in the United States, there's about 260 million vehicles on the road. Most of those are gasoline powered. But the thing is that we only drive our cars and utilize them about 5% of the time. So in cities, we're really talking about urban mobility here, so keep that in mind. There's a very big differentiation. But in cities, that means you're storing your motor vehicles roughly 95% of the time. They're being stored on very highly valuable real estate. In the United States, there's about 500 million commercial parking spaces, so about 2 parking spaces for every motor vehicle that's registered. In the city of Houston, there's 30 spaces per registered vehicle. It's a lot of real estate dedicated to the storing of motor vehicles. Or, in this case, about the size of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. So we asked the question, what happens when cars start driving themselves? So a couple of terminologies I'll go through really fast, but Tom mentioned it. Internal combustion engines. It's currently kind of the state of the state. Electric vehicles are coming, and they're coming fast, and there's a lot of investment in it, but electric vehicles are the thing that allows us to be able to have driverless technology and autonomous technology. And electric vehicles are already here. Autonomous vehicles, which are assisted driving, and then individual ownership, people that own their own car, and then the alternative, which is transportation as a service. That's Uber and Lyft and other things along that line, which is taking more and more of the passenger trips on the road right now. So if you own a car that's 10 years old, or less than 10 years old, you already have a computer in your car. Okay? It's already helping you operate the car. If you have a car that's less than 5 years old, you have a computer that's helping you with certain aspects of driving, whether it's backup lights, whether it's sensors. If you have a car that's 2 years old or less, you already have autonomous capabilities. If you think about it, when you're driving cars that correct themselves, that warn you when you're about to hit something, that read the lines. So some of this is already built in. You're already driving some spectacular vehicles with this built into it. But what is happening? Why do we feel like there's a future that's going to be very much driverless? Well, first of all, humans are the primary cause of car accidents, and 40,000 people die a year in automobile accidents. So there is a safety factor that's been involved, and there's a lot of companies that are looking at this and saying, can we make cars safer? Second thing is that electric vehicles are significantly simpler than internal combustion engine vehicles, but also they tend to run a lot longer. So average lifespan is about 1 million miles for an electric vehicle that's currently being built today, like a Tesla, or the internal combustion engine, which is about 100,000 miles. Now, Tesla's been running cars up to 5 million miles right now, and they're still running. So electric vehicles have a chance to really extend the life of our motor vehicles. If you look at this chart, in 2018, most of the cars that were bought were for individual ownership. Projections are that in 2030 to 2035, rideshare is going to take up a significantly larger portion. The vehicles that are being purchased are going to be used for rideshare, for Uber and Lyft and other types of transportation services than they will for individual ownership. So that shift also talks about how you provide those services and why that might be electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle attractive to companies. But there's another component, which is that the opportunity to have a driverless vehicle or autonomous vehicle opens up mobility for a lot of people that currently don't have it. The youth, elderly people, anybody with a driving disability. This gives more opportunities to have a vehicle that they can utilize for their trips. But there's a few other things that are going on in cities. And again, remember, very much about urban mobility. It's a lot cheaper to take rideshare in cities than it is to actually own a car in a city. You can see these in some of the major cities, large cities, New York, Chicago, DC. Utilizing Uber instead of your car is actually a lot cheaper. So that's driving some people's decisions on ownership. Wall Street Journal put out a study, which if you'll notice this, there's only one demographic, and that's people over 55 that are actually buying more cars. The trend is going up in that group. All the other age groups, all the other demographics, the trend is going down. Families are buying one car instead of two, for example. Younger people are not buying a car until much later on in their life. So that trend in terms of what they're purchasing and why they're purchasing is also dropping. Automobile companies recognize this. But also another trend that we saw, we're working with some researchers at MIT, is that actually estimated miles of peak driving is going down. It has been going down since 2005. People are using other transportation modes, other mobility modes more often than they are just driving their car, whether that's Uber and Lyft or scooters or bikes or anything else. So that is driving car utilization down. And then there's a really huge, and this happens as a capitalistic society, United States in particular, there is a massive investment being made by companies, Fortune 500 companies, in autonomous technology for a whole variety of reasons. But when companies are making that kind of a bet, there's a very good chance that momentum on its own will help to drive things into the technology. So here's just some of the Fortune 500 companies that have made huge bets into autonomous driving technologies. So how does that work? Autonomous cars basically work with some pretty simple features, which is sensors using radar, infrared, lasers to sense the environment around them, communicate back to a computer, which by the way is about the size of your cell phone, if you want to think about what the computer brain looks like on that, and be able to give that input back to the car and instantaneously react to it with data sets. So for example, this is what an autonomous car or a driverless car is typically doing as it's going down the road. It's sensing all the stuff that's going on around. Now right now it's doing this without the benefit of having communication two-way coming back to them in the cities. But a lot of cities are putting in now communications to communicate with autonomous vehicles. So cities are making a bet that it's coming and they're making investments into it. But there are some other advantages that cities are seeing. For example, driverless cars could drive really close to one another. So therefore you could put a lot more vehicles on the road than you can in the same amount of space than you currently have. We don't need to build larger highways or more highway lanes. If we have this kind of technology available, we can actually put more vehicles on the road than we currently have if we need them. So what is some of the impact on real estate? Well, first of all, one of the premises that we'll go to, and I ask everybody this all the time, is the most walkable cities, most desirable cities are walkable. They're pedestrian friendly. And you can go through it. Most of them have a very robust transportation system. So for example, here's a picture of Copenhagen, one of the best cities in the world. People rank this over and over and over again as one of the greatest cities to be in. This is a city street that used to have horses, then had automobiles, now it's got people, pedestrians. Wolfgang referenced that over and over again. What is it about design that we're working at? We're working at things and we're looking at cities for people. New York, the same thing. New York has been, we look at it, say it's a car-heavy city, but it is turning those streets over to people. Here's Broadway, Times Square. It used to be all those automobiles. They changed it over, made it pedestrian, very pedestrian friendly, very difficult to get cars in and out. Rents have gone up, revenue's gone up. People like being in Times Square a lot more and in Broadway a lot more than they used to do, and it's actually a lot safer to be there. So a few other things I'll run through really quickly, but fees from parking. We talked about parking a little bit earlier. They're dropping year over year over year. Developers and landowners that used to have parking as a huge revenue, this is dropping by about 10 to 15% year over year. That revenue is disappearing. It's happening whether or not autonomous vehicles are here, but the utilization of that parking is changing, and people are rethinking how they're using parking. So, for example, as a developer that we're talking to in the pro forma, when they go to get their financing for it, they can no longer use the parking revenue in the same way they used to. They have to think about different ways of generating revenue. So we looked at in our research a whole variety of different things that are happening in real estate. I won't go through all of them, but I have been focusing on parking because it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the place that right now people are making decisions to utilize parking in very different ways. So part of our study said that when we look at parking, each one of these shows different types, standalone, above grade, below grade, surface parking, but the ability to utilize it much more efficiently and effectively happens over and over and over again. So as a space comparison, standard parking space about a 9 by 20. A bedroom in a Cambridge apartment out by where I live in Boston is about a 7 by 10, so you can pretty much put a bedroom in a parking space. That's a trade-off that people are looking at. We are also looking at parking garages and structures that are existing today. Can we utilize those more effectively, actually use more cars in there, or use less space for the same number of cars? And robotics is one of the big moves that's happening. So, for example, here's a project, One Post Office Square in Boston. It's a complete redo and renovation of a historic existing building owned by Morgan Stanley, who is in the business of investing money. And they've invested in these robotic parking systems. We actually are getting the same amount of parking spaces in here that they had before in a much more effective way, and we've freed up a lot of real estate. In this rendering on the bottom, you can see that there are also robotic parking structures and trays that are designed in, very high ceilings. Morgan Stanley doesn't believe they'll ever rent these to their tenants, but they've made them available because the tenants have said they wanted them, but that nobody wants to pay for them. So they actually think this is going to become rental space by the time this project's finished in 2021. Above grade parking, sort of the same thing. We designed this building for parking. You can see it looks like a parking garage. Speed ramps in the middle, high ceilings, flat slabs. It was supposed to be for parking, but because the city required it as zoning, we opened it. They couldn't sell the parking, so they've now put office space in here. Below grade parking, if you want to reuse below grade parking, we're also doing this for clients. Great places for data centers, great places for storage, great places for things like, say, SoulCycle, which has a dark room, or amenity spaces. So Amazon is looking at storage spaces in old parking garages because that helps them to put things in the middle of cities for deliveries. A lot of reutilization opportunities. And this one just because Reebok asked us, and we partnered with Reebok, and they said, what about the future of gas stations? What if we go to this electric vehicle mode? Could we maybe turn gas stations into electric vehicle charging stations? And because it takes 30 or 45 minutes, you can maybe do a workout while you're there. And then lastly, the thing that's happening that we're seeing as rideshare and other types of technology are taking over and people are using their cars less and less is what we went from parking, talked about utilizing parking more efficiently. Curbside is now being packed with vehicles. So for example, at the Grove, they have in LA, they've got a designated zone for people to get picked up. What's happening there that they found out is that people are not driving or utilizing this or shopping another 20 or 30 minutes longer, buying more stuff, they're making more money. It's win-win. So we designed this in downtown LA, and we said, okay, well, maybe you should design a place rather than saying go out and stand by the curb, stand by the sign, but actually design it. So this one's designed to be able to say, we're going to accept the fact there's all this rideshare that happens. This is very close to the theater areas, and do something really nice for people to be able to stay in and be able to hang out and wait for their rides to come. And then just lastly, just because this is a typical campus, you guys have all seen these before, giant campus surrounded by parking. You'll notice in this particular photo, about 4 years old, most of the parking is not utilized. This is at peak capacity for this particular campus. So what if we made it greener? What if you could green some of that? Would it add value? In this particular case, 2000 Avenue of the Stars, downtown LA, the rents went up by about $10 a square foot in the buildings around it when we took all the concrete that was in the middle of this campus and turned it green. Campuses using electric shuttles. So again, going back to what Wolfgang and the team have talked about, are implementing electric shuttles to take students and other people around campuses. They're very large walking areas, scooters. This is an opportunity. So this is already happening. These are on campuses. And then lastly, another thing that cities are asking us to do is to look at some of these transit corridors or abandoned corridors. Maybe you could have mixed use with electric vehicles, rides, reuse those corridors in a way. Highline in New York did this. This is for Brooklyn. They said, could we do this, but in this kind of a transit corridor at grade? So I'll kind of leave it with a couple of thoughts. So one of the things that we're being asked about all the time, and this is a study that a group over in England did, and we just co-opted this one, but they were saying, well, maybe what the really solution is to take a couple lanes of existing traffic and make that dedicated. So you're not actually mixing autonomous vehicles with drivered vehicles at the same time, because the two of those mixes is very challenging. So there's a horizontal separation that's being proposed and being looked into. Or in the case of some work we're doing with a company called Sidewalk Labs, that's part of Google, and Toronto, they're looking at it and saying, well, most cities are vertical, so maybe the separation should be vertical. And could we create these zones, pedestrian dedicated, mobility dedicated, transit dedicated in the zone? So we're doing some studies. We're one of many architects that are looking at this for Google up in Toronto. So when is it going to happen? Well, right now we're about between level 2 and level 3 on autonomous, meaning that most cars have some form of self-driving capabilities. Wolfgang showed you some beautiful pictures of what might be a hybrid version. There are level 4 cars on the road today. You may not even know it. There are level 4 cars that are like UPS just announced that they've been using level 4 cars for the last 6 months to drop off your packages. Level 5, that's coming probably in the next 5 to 7 years. Those are completely self-driving capable. So we're probably about 3 to 7 years away from having these on the road in a very robust fashion. And I'll leave you with this, because we started with the horseless carriage. So when we talk about disruption, and we really believe that this is a very disruptive technology, and it's going to change the way we use our cities. Henry Ford asked people, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So here's the happy news, is looking back to New York, the horses aren't in the city anymore, but horses exist. They're still being used in a very fantastic way. The relationship between people and horses are thriving. So you use it for recreation, still working for work. The motor vehicles that are surrounded by all these beautiful machines that people use for their recreation, for their enjoyment, they're not going away either. Just like the horse, they'll probably be utilized differently and probably in a much more effective way. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to bring one of these cars into any city that I walk around in. So I think there's a happy ending with all that. And I'll leave it to the next group to talk a little bit more about what that future might look like in the future of cities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, do you need this back?
I hope it was a bit thought-provoking for everybody. It sure is for me, I'll tell you that. Hernán Kraviez is going to present some innovative design concepts for elevated transportation structures. Just as J.F. Finn said, if cities are going to go vertical, then how is this going to be designed and be compatible? I had the unique opportunity last year, almost a year ago to the day, to work directly with Hernán and the Norman Foster Foundation on an urban mobility seminar in Madrid, Spain, where their headquarters are located. At that time, we started thinking about just what Hernán is going to talk about today. And that is, especially for these elevated transit systems that, and these elevated roadways for autonomous vehicles, how can they be integrated into cities in such a way as to make them attractive and not an eyesore? The foundation, the Norman Foster Foundation, holds the Norman Foster Archive and Library, and it documents the lifelong accomplishments of Lord Norman Foster, who may very well be the world's most famous living architect. These are a few of his more famous buildings. One in the upper left-hand corner is what is, I don't know, lovingly called the Gherkin Building in London. The Millau Viaduct, which is in France, in the upper right-hand corner, which is incredibly beautiful. Closer to home here in the lower right-hand corner, the new Apple World Headquarters in Cupertino. And the lower left-hand corner is the Millennium Bridge over the Thames, a pedestrian bridge that Hernán is going to be talking about. Hernán graduated with honors in architecture at the School of Architecture, Design, and Urbanism of the University of Buenos Aires, followed by professional development courses at Harvard University. He then received his MSc degree in architecture, can I say that?
You can say that.
Okay, from the Bartlett School of Architecture at University College in London. Very well-educated, well-traveled guy. Last year, he became the head of architecture, design, and technology for the Norman Foster Foundation in Madrid. And I think you're going to find his comments really, really interesting. Hernán?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the introduction. And Tom, well, you introduced myself, I've introduced the work of Norman Foster. You can see some of the buildings there. What you haven't said, and maybe because maybe you didn't know it, is that Norman is also, like yourself, a car nut. So this is a very interesting, this is part of his actually quite large collection of classic cars. And this is a very special one. It's a Dymaxion from 1934. It's a car originally designed by Buckminster Fuller. Up until very recently, actually 12 years ago, there were only 3 prototypes of this car in the world. And Norman had one built 12 years ago, which he has, so this will be number 4. There's only 4 in the world.
That's not Buckminster Fuller.
That is Norman Foster. Very soon we will have actually that car in display at the foundation, the Norman Foster Foundation in Madrid. The one that we do have now, it's another one, very special one of his cars, of his collection, which is a Voisin C7 from 1925, the one you can see in the picture. And it's a very special one for us as well, because this is the car that used to belong to a very famous Swiss architect called Le Corbusier. So it has a very special meaning. Going back to, let's say, the theme that we've been talking about over the last few minutes, it can be, I think, very well, kind of like describe as imagining the future. What will the future be? And I may not be a car nut, but I'm a film buff. And I want to start by showing a couple of very short clips. One is Metropolis, the amazing Fritz Lang movie, and it should be working, but it's not. No. Always happens. It's not happening. Okay. Don't know why. Should we try it again?
Anyway, tell them what the movie
Don't know.
shows. Because
Metropolis from 1927, Fritz Lang, and if you could see the image, you would see flying vehicles, you would see a public transport, with, around tall buildings, obviously with cars in the base. It's a shame that this is happening. I don't understand. Okay. And if we fast forward to 1982, let's see if this one works. No. 1982, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott. There you go. Thank you, whoever is doing it. Yeah? Ridley Scott imagined that this year, 2019, LA was going to look like that. So, well, he got it wrong, but maybe not, for that much. You can see the flying vehicles. You can definitely see the tall buildings, and it's very much, something that now doesn't look completely alien, or not alien at all. What worries me is that all of these movies, and I could actually show a lot more, they always show a future that is a dystopian future. It's a future where cities are actually not a nice place to live in. Cities are always shown as places with lots of inequalities. Rich people living at the top, poor people living at terrible conditions at the base. Which, if we are honest, it's not that dissimilar to some things that are happening now. And I could show, not again this, and I could show images of many different cities around the world. Shanghai, Middle East, this is Doha, even London, where some similarities, at least in terms of the design of the buildings, is starting to happen. They don't look that dissimilar to those imagining futures that the movies were showing us. And again, if we are honest, there's lots of inequalities in all of these cities. So yes, there's lots of problems in the city. And this is a global problem. It's cities all around the world. But the truth is that cities are the future. There's no doubt about that. By 2050, 70% of the population will be urban. Also, they generate 70% of the global energy and the emissions. They generate wealth. We can say that 1 in 3 people will end up living in what we are now calling informal settlements. So that is a big problem of cities. We are now facing new megalopolis cities of over 100 million citizens. So the rate of urbanization that we are experiencing is something that it was very hard to imagine a few years ago. So if we concentrate on the energy that is needed to run these cities, 75% of the energy is actually from buildings and infrastructure. So you can see that we, as architects, as designers, we have a lot to do in terms of making this better. Many of the buildings that have been designed by Norman Foster, by Foster and Partners, throughout the history have all been to try to make them as green as possible, whether it is from the first skyscraper design, HSBC Tower in Hong Kong, the Reichstag in Berlin, a net zero building, right to most recent, the Apple campus. It's always striving to do the most greenest possible buildings. And the same with the infrastructure. And infrastructure, in a way, has even a wider way of expanding into cities and even regions, making improvements. And let me talk about 3 of them. Trafalgar Square in London. If you ask anybody now in London how did Trafalgar Square look a few years ago, nobody actually remembers that it looked like this picture. It was completely cut off by traffic. In 2003, this was completely redesigned. It's a pedestrianized zone. And yes, we're talking about bringing, design is for people. Wolfgang said it, Jeff said it, and I am going to repeat it also a few more times. This is bringing cities back to people. The Millennium Bridge in London. This is the first bridge built in London after more than 100 years. And what it did was something that was completely different to what the prediction when we were designing it was. This is a graphic of the prediction of how it was going to be used and how it was going to activate the areas around. And this was actually the reality. Instead of 8 million crossings per year that were predicted, instead of 4, 8 million crossings per year were happening. So double that. Double the amount of new jobs that it created. And it increased even the visitors to St. Paul's Cathedral, which is something that was actually not even thought when the bridge was being designed. Going back to another country, in France, in the south of France, the Millau Bridge. The Millau Bridge helped to solve a massive traffic problem that used to look like this, with 1 every 20 vehicles being a truck, which of course all of the problems with emissions that means. And with the construction of the bridge, that was the equivalent of planting 40,000 trees in terms of the reduction in emissions just by building that bridge, which, by the way, looks beautiful. So if there is one drawback that bridge has is that everyone that crosses it, they always say one thing, that the only thing they want to do is to turn back and cross it again, which might generate other problems. So anyway, we like to say that these projects are projects that are bringing innovation through a combination of different things. And there's one example of those projects, which was that collaboration that Tom mentioned earlier that we did together with BYD, which was for their amazing SkyRail project that Wolfgang introduced a few minutes ago. So monorails, electric monorails in this case, but monorails are an old concept. You can see here a picture from 1876 in Philadelphia. And they started to develop during that time, but of course, as you very well know, there was something else being developed at that time, and those were cars. There's no, I think, argument that the cars won the race in terms of transportation for people, and it took over cities. And that generated things like this, which are not as good. And this could be a picture of, I would say, almost any city in the world. Congestion that brings pollution and that brings lots of problems that we are now facing. So the SkyRail, when we got together with BYD, we started to think, what else apart from mobility can this system bring? Could we redesign it so that it generates other benefits to cities? So we created a system which is a flexible, a kit of parts that could be assembled in different ways and also combine other uses. So, for instance, wide avenues where 10 lanes of cars used to be could be actually reduced. We could introduce the Skyrail as, of course, a mass transportation system, and then with the integration of other uses, like for instance at the base, lots of, could be commercial spaces, could be lots of activities for people. A logical one would be the introduction of cycle tracks integrated into the system. And while we are all using, obviously, internal combustion cars, we will need to do something to try to avoid the emissions. So an integrated system that could turn those emissions into clean air. And these are, you can see there in the picture, those could be integrated. And these are things that exist. The picture on the left is from a company in the Netherlands. The picture on the right is from the company in Germany, working on these sort of systems that basically suck the CO2 and transform it into clean air. Now, the idea that we looked at together was to introduce this sort of system into different kinds of cities, whether it is Latin American cities like Mexico, European cities like London, San Francisco Bay Area, close to here, or even informal settlements. So, for instance, in a highly dense, let's say, European setting where you cannot grow higher because of different restrictions, you could, by integrating the Skyrail system, you could introduce housing, you could introduce ports, that could also be offices. So in a similar way to how you rent, now how you use Uber or other systems, you could rent these spaces and basically adding more density and other uses into an existing area. Going through an informal settlement, it could obviously add the benefit of transportation, bringing obviously the people who live in these informal settlements closer and of course in a faster way to the places where they work. As in the previous slide, it could generate the space for new dwellings so that could free up spaces to introduce public spaces, because those are much needed in those areas. Yeah? And of course, there's also the introduction of places where they can work. There's urban farming that could be introduced as part of the system, so that they can not only grow things to eat themselves, but also to sell. A system that could be easily integrated into green areas. So it's not something that's going to ruin, basically, a park or an open area like the one showing the picture, but on the contrary, will integrate it and make it better. The whole idea behind this is to form sustainable cities that are connected, that are walkable, that are compact, yeah? And that could bring in the most efficient way a wide mix of uses, like the ones shown on this slide. So if I go back to the vision for what we call 2020, this is next year, that could look like this, I could very easily say that ideally maybe 2021 or 2022, those cars that you see there will be replaced by BYD's EV cars and other, obviously, makes that could be that we all now are more familiar with, and basically that will mean that we won't need to transform CO2 emissions into clean air. The air will be cleaner already, and we could use the system to introduce maybe vertical farming or other productivity centers in the same system. And beyond, making it greener, we can start seeing how the future system could start adapting into autonomous vehicles and other means of public transportation, bringing the city back to people, greener, and all the things that we think are best for the city of the future, so that the future doesn't look like what we all thought from the movies. It's not just about transport. We have a social imperative. It's not just about mobility. It's a holistic approach, because it's about the future of the city. so that it doesn't look like Blade Runner and what Ridley Scott imagined. Thank you.
So I said it was going to be different, right, from what we've been talking about here, and I hope you found it quite interesting. I think for me, working with these three people who are recognized around the world as leaders in their respective fields, it's been a real pleasure. If we've helped stimulate any questions, we may have a couple minutes left. Yes?
Do all three of you give some focus to people with mobility issues in your general designs? Do you try to make it universally adaptable?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Just as a question, as we've traveled, and I've been all over the world, so a lot of the cities kind of grew up with public transportation, and it works reasonably well, and we appreciate it. We're in LA. There was no public transportation. They've been trying to put it in. Public transportation is actually shrinking. Have you talked about how do you handle a city like LA and a number of other cities that are of a similar vintage that grew up around a car, where you work in M locations and live in N locations?
I might take that one.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I was born and raised in LA. I'm working with BYD in LA. The voters of Los Angeles in 2016, by over a 70% margin, voted to tax themselves for without any kind of sunset, another 1% sales tax for mass transit. That's unheard of. They have a $120 to $30 billion program voted to pay for by themselves for mass transit. And as a matter of fact, we're proposing monorail for a couple of those corridors, and I think they're going to be successful. We'll see. LA is changing. It's not the place where I grew up. It's very different. It's much denser than it was. People have now given up, I think, on the future of the automobile for commuting already. They hate it. It's taking hours for people to get to and from work. And so I think it's quite relevant what these guys have been talking about. Is there a way to free up space for people for advanced technologies and still preserve the independence that we need for the kinds of cars that we see here and that we like to drive? I am optimistic. I was not optimistic really until I met these guys, and now I am optimistic again. I think there is an answer, and I think it requires very sound design, a very advanced technology, and I will acknowledge, I think it takes a bit of a change in the mindset of the populace, and I think it's evidenced by the people of Los Angeles, using them again as an example, deciding to tax themselves to try to change that transportation future. By the way, in LA, the decline in mass transit patronage that you're talking about is primarily on the bus system. Why? Buses are getting stuck in traffic. That's why. And so buses are getting slower and slower and slower. Mass transit is not getting slower. I mean, rapid transit is not getting slower and slower. So, but we can have this discussion over a beer, and it'll be even more effective. Yes.
I'll join you for that because I'm also from LA.
Yes.
A follow-up to that question, though, is what are you guys doing with I guess, government and political figures that, because I love your ideas. I did engineering, but I'm also working in entertainment, so I love what you're doing, and I can see it, like, engineering-wise. But, like, how are you guys working with the local governments to enact these realities? Because some of them are really not only maybe initially cost prohibitive, but it's hard politically to get groups of people to agree to do that thing, especially if you have infrastructure already there. Like, what are you guys doing to, like, really give these ideas to the new politicians that are running and be like, this is the type of change that I want to make, and this is how I'm going to get everyone in my community to support it?
I'm looking at you, JF.
So, great question. It's also a very great question. So I was born and raised in LA as well, and I could tell you about some of the changes that I've seen. And I think there's a couple things. Number one, as you know, politics runs in these now literally like 6-month cycles, but 2 or 4 year cycles, and the politicians to be able to have momentum. Transit projects take a long time to turn over. And I used to tell people I worked on a lot of high-speed rail corridors, and we're not designing high-speed rail for me. We're designing it for our kids and for their kids. And when you see the ones that are very effective, you have to look in those kind of time frames, which means they have to have private sector support, and they have to have community support. So the community consensus will actually often force the politician in a certain way to go things so that it isn't, if a politician is the leader of it, it's probably going to fail in terms of that movement because it'll get dropped at the next cycle that goes through it. And Tom and I have been working together on transit stuff for 35 years. A lot of the things we worked on 20 years ago are now finally becoming really robust, and they've took time to effect and then to move forward. But they had champions within the community who believed in them, who took them forward. And so when we look at these projects, we have a lot of outreach and community consensus building to make sure that the community is going to be the driver behind it and sees that there's value to them. And if you don't have that, again, you won't force the politicians, but you're also going to fail in the long run. So that's a big part of the decision-making process. You also have to prove them out in terms of the value basis that you can generate. So most of our projects, and I think Hernán is doing the same thing, looking at the projects he's saying, there's like transit-oriented development. We can show real value to the private sector as well. You get private sector engagement in it. So you really need to have both those support mechanisms, or you really shouldn't be pushing forward with the idea of the project in terms of drivers. That said, having a champion at the political level, like Mayor Garcetti in LA, for example, or someone who wants a champion, is going to be the thing that can help to push it over the top. And so you have to have all three of those engagements working as you're working through these plans. And it has to be justifiable on some level, and whether it's an in lieu one for cost basis, or it's a positive for the environment, or it's something that you can look at and say it's going to generate value for the development teams, because a lot of these projects are driven or at least supported by the development structure. Those have to be in place. And and Tom and I talked a lot about these when you're going through go, no goes, is you got to be able to have all three of those boxes checked to get the momentum that takes it to run through 2 or 3 or 4 political cycles to be supportive and to be, we built a monorail in Las Vegas, which is the goofiest thing in the entire known universe, but it had all three of those going for it. It had champions who were going to have the longevity to take it to the 8th and the 10th. Now they're actually doing extensions because the operators out there, both from the private and the public sector side, see it as having value. And it seems really crazy, but for that particular use, it was beautiful. It moves a ton of people to the right places, doing the right thing, at a very low impact to that city. But it had those champions at all three of those levels. And Tom was very instrumental in making sure that stuff happened and knowing it. And that's the lessons learned when you're old like us. That, you go like, okay, we've gone through enough of these to make it viable. I just had one thing on the LA, is that very often when we look at these corridors, you have to be able to look at the corridor and say, is it the right technology for the right utilization for the right place and location? Because those investments take a long time to play out over a long time. So that's one of the other aspects that designers hopefully take into account.
We have a question over here.
Thank you for showing us this wonderful perspective of future. You said you are the sponsor of Mother Nature, and I was missing one idea. Perhaps you can comment on that. Do you know the word bionic? How biology, how nature solves problems, and I think, for instance, it's incredible that we didn't find the way how to reproduce photosynthesis, which would be the best way of energy. Are you researching on these things? Solidity, lightweight and solidity in nature gives us examples which are incredible. Are we researching on these fields? Because nature, in my opinion, gives us wonderful examples how nature solves problems, even an organization of masses.
I think that's very forward-thinking of you, and I'm not aware of BYD getting into the bionic side of it, but I think that it offers great promise. Just this example of these algae tubes, if I can call them that, that Hernán was presenting. I saw a bridge in Geneva, Switzerland, that's equipped with those tubes, that is cleaning the air. It is taking in carbon dioxide. It is emitting oxygen, pure oxygen. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are going to happen. And I think we need to figure out how to deploy them, as well as you're saying, do the research. Yeah.
There is a lot of movement in biophilic design, and I think you'll see a lot of architecture now, materiality of composite materials, just like in cars. Certainly, Foster's office has done a ton of work in this area, and has been doing so for 30 years, but using nature as a model. And you'll hear that biophilia as kind of a term that gets thrown out a lot, but it is learning from what nature has done to be able to create structures and networks even. And I think that's kind of where you're driving at, is those networks. I haven't heard anybody using photosynthesis in the energy cycle, but you certainly are seeing a lot more biophilic understanding being integrated into design. And part of what it's doing is providing us a lot more flexibility in doing really cool architecture, but also in doing really effective designs, both from a structural point of view, but also from a networking and electric data point of view. So the buildings are becoming much smarter because of the biophilia design that goes along with it.
We have another question over here.
Yeah, thank you for that. The point you made about politics community, that works for the US maybe, but not so much for the rest of the world, China or Europe. I wonder if you see any problems with so much of the process being led by private firms seeking profit, and like the rideshare model, or whether it be real estate. And related to that, I wonder if this increasing concentration of the cities is going to exacerbate the inequality between cities and non-cities. And finally, related to all of that, what about jobs? What jobs do you anticipate this sort of landscape, urbanscape, will create? Because there's a lot of worry, obviously, about all of this transition sort of destroying traditional jobs in transport. Thank you.
My answer is they didn't teach me any of that in engineering school, so I don't know the answer. Hernán might have some ideas.
I don't know. There's many things there in that question. I think, it's funny. Jeff also showed the transition from horses to cars. There's been changes throughout history. There's been jobs lost and others gained throughout history. So I cannot tell you exactly exactly what will happen. We know a little bit of what's happening, but I think there's something that I can say for sure, that this is unavoidable. These changes have to happen, are happening, and have to happen, and a lot more. There's no way. I mean, if we want cities that are sustainable, of course, things need to change. So sorry, I'm mixing now with what you said about, LA and that. What, it will happen. Or even your question about, political, what happens with politicians. We are finding more and more people that are, have a similar mindset in terms of what needs to be done, and a lot more support also in the political world. But I think, the ones that are against, or the ones that do not want changes, I mean, there's no way. There's no way to avoid it. It has to happen. If we want cities to be livable cities, these things will have to happen, Public transportation is a must, It has to be like that. So, yeah. Don't know if I'm answering your question in particular, but...
No, these are amazing questions, and I think we have to acknowledge that what you're talking about is social justice.
Yeah.
And Tom mentioned about buses and things, for example. So within the bus transport world versus, say, the rail transport world, there's also a great economic and inequality in there. And I think as designers, particularly as somebody who can shape cities, and we all have that opportunity to be able to shape cities, we have a really distinct responsibility, particularly in the United States, where you can do that. I think the encouraging thing, and I'm always glass half full, is that when we are going out to these communities, we're finding there are a lot of people in the communities that recognize the fact that social justice inequality actually hurts them in the long run. And so making that evening out and being able to provide more opportunities to have a more robust system for everybody is actually beneficial for everyone in the long run. You look at what's happened in LA and Skid Row in that area, and I think that's not good for anybody, particularly for the people that are in those situations. And having those transitional points to be able to allow people to get back into society is actually beneficial for most cities. I'll be very frank, I don't have as much experience in the depth of going outside of the US market, although I've done transport projects in Asia. We don't get into it as much of a level, so I apologize, I can't really respond to that. But I know that it's a much more challenging situation because of the decision-making process that goes with it. But I think if we can affect change in the US, and I think we have the ability to, and I think we have the responsibility to, those models can be translated out in the long run, and they do get translated out to other places. So,
Wolfgang?
Yes, I think we should also take the chance to make it different. I'm remembering it. I told you before about the new experience, what you can have. Not just get on the transport mean and go from here to here. It can be completely different, the transport means. And it will change our world completely in a short time also. It will create a new world. And this just is one example is this. It's happened here, where we're sitting here around. And it is the experience of this was what changed our world. It's about the experience, and it's not about logics or something else. And so also I'm fully convinced that this also in the public transportation and in the city systems, we will have some effect like this here also in the future. We have to work for that. This is a real challenge. And
You're very patient, thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much. In the Bay Area, particularly in the South Bay, most of the corporate real estate investment is still in the horizontal, low-rise, car-dependent office development. As you go further north, of course, you get in San Francisco, it's all vertical, transit, et cetera. Is the low-rise corporate campus with miles and miles of parking, is that extinct or going to be extinct?
Yes. Yeah. There was, yeah, I mean, there's even the example of the Apple campus that you know, we were asked to design it with an X amount of parking spaces that are actually not even used, you know, so that, you know,
it's already the case.
It's already the case, you know, it's,
Yeah.
and it will be more and more in the future.
So we're taking this team up to the Silicon Valley on Monday, meeting with some community leaders, meeting with some business leaders to talk about that. What are the solutions for that kind of urban development pattern? And we think we have some. Yeah.
You know, one thing to think about is that the fight for talent in every one of those companies you're talking about, a lot of them are our clients, are fighting really hard for talent. And the talent's saying, I don't want to live in that environment. I don't want to work in that environment, and I'm not going to go there, and I'm not going to drive a car because I don't own a car. Or I have other means of transport, and I want to go to someplace I can bike or scooter to. And so the fight for talent is actually bringing a lot of those companies either to doing much more robust mixed-use projects, which are much more livable and having more, you know, more integration of things, or bringing them closer in towards the city where they can have the other parts of their experience in their lives active to it. So in many weird ways, the fight for talent will drive those corporations, going back to your profit motive, finding the right way to drive profit motive sometimes can drive behavior. And that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing, even in Boston, we're seeing companies that were moving out, coming back into the ex-urban areas, which are the ones that are a couple miles just outside of the city, and they're going there because then they can still experience the city, and that's where they're locating their headquarters. So it's an interesting dynamic.
So I know last question, because I think we're over time already. We appreciate your patience. Yes?
So in the Bay Area, you also have to start thinking about providing housing for those kids.
Well,
Yeah.
that's, yeah. How much time do you guys have? You want to talk about housing?
Affordable housing?
That's a panel.
That's like an oxymoron here. Yeah.
Housing for parking spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like maybe one last question. Excuse me.
Another one there.
One more minute. Question is how design or architecture can accelerate the technological progress.
Go ahead and repeat it. Yes.
My question is to Wolfgang or to Hernán, you know, how the design or architecture can accelerate the technological progress. What should we do?
Yeah, what should we do? We should do integration. Integration in the systems, looking for the different transport means and looking how the people, here we are back to the people, how they use really these transport means. And with our fantasy, with our creativity, we can create also new kind of experience that people in the end, they change their approach to the transport means. I think young people already are on the way. We know a lot of, in Europe is like that, for example, that 20-year-old people already, they don't inspire anymore so much the driving license. There are many without. I think here's the same. So the approach already has changed completely, and we have to offer them something here. We cannot say, no, you have to do. We have to offer something, and at the moment we don't offer it really, and we have to work for that to offer this more. And not only with cars, there are also other.
You know, the theme today, in my mind, was asking these folks how quality design can actually improve the acceptance of advanced technology, rather than the other way around. And I think that it can. I think they've given you a number of examples of how it can. But once it does that, then it also, I think, does stimulate more technological development. So the two must go hand in hand. But first and foremost, I think the whole theme we were trying to convey today in terms of our thinking was quality design of automobiles, of trucks, of buses, of mass transit can go a long way towards making technology advancements happen. And I think I think that we've hopefully demonstrated that to you today. Thank you very much.